Today is August 4th, 2023. This is Political Dharma, and I am Alan Zundell. The topic of today's episode is worries about Cornel West being a spoiler in the 2024 presidential election. As followers of the show are aware, Cornel West, the so-called public intellectual, I don't say that to disparage him, but it's a term not everyone is familiar with, is an academic and has some best-selling books. He's also a political activist, has spoken in the media and written a lot of opinion pieces, all that kind of stuff. So he's a well-known figure on the left who has been around a long time. He has announced in June, early June, that he's going to seek the nomination of the Green Party in the United States. Newsweek, the national news magazine, had a series of articles in June and July raising these concerns that West would serve as a spoiler of the 2024 presidential election, enabling Donald Trump to beat Joe Biden. Now, they based their concerns on a survey by Echelon Insights firm. I guess that's the name of the survey. I'm not sure if it's also the firm that conducted it, but Echelon Insights, they conducted a poll from June 26th to June 29th and asked a lot of questions about people's opinions on different candidates and things like that. And based on that, they decided there's worthy of news articles about Cornel West being a spoiler. Now, this is what I want to look at, the poll in particular, take it apart a little bit and ask questions about how much we can rely on this and whether it makes sense. But first, let me just mention that last week I said I was going to spend this show talking about the candidates for the National Political Committee of the Democratic Socialists of America. The DSA delegates are meeting for a national convention this weekend, and one of the things they're going to do is vote on the people to be on their National Political Committee, which is their highest body. But I found out there's about 41 candidates sorted between independents and 9 different slates, and it was just too much information for me to assimilate with the time I had. I'm going to be doing a show next week, at least this is the plan, interviewing a delegate who went to that convention, and through that maybe getting insight on who these people are that won seats onto the National Political Committee and what that portends for the future of the DSA. But that's not a topic for today. That's the topic for next week. So let's turn to this poll that was done by the Echelon Insights, or the Echelon Insights poll, however you want to talk about it. So what they said is that if you matched up Donald Trump and Joe Biden head to head in the late June when they ran this survey, and no other candidates were listed, that Trump would get 44% of people voting, saying that definitely or probably they would vote for him, whereas 45% said they would definitely or probably vote for Joe Biden, the presumed Democratic candidate. Now, apart from the fact that it's a long way to the nomination conventions of July of next year, primaries still are months away, we have no idea what's going to happen between now and then, whether Donald Trump and Joe Biden are really going to be the nominees or whether even Cornel West will get the Green Party nomination. So all those caveats in place. But if the presidential election were held at the time this survey was taken in late June of this year, it looks like Joe Biden would be ahead of Donald Trump, 45 to 44%, very narrow margin. But if you ask that question again with Cornel West added to the survey, you find that Trump goes down from 44 to 43%, that's minus 1 percentage point, and Biden goes down from 45 to 42%, which is a minus 3 in percentage points, and Cornel West then gets 4%. Caveats with that. Let's start with the most obvious ones. First, the margin of error for this survey is 3.9%. That's almost 4 percentage points. So that when you say Trump is ahead 44 to 45, I mean, I got them listed in the wrong order here. Biden is ahead of Trump 45 to 44%, or even that Trump is, you add West and it switches to Trump 43 and Biden 42%. They're so close, it's well inside the margin of error. So you can't tell when you try to extrapolate these results to the whole population and predict what they would do. There's no way you can say that one would have beaten the other. It's just too close to call. is too close to the margin of error to be able to say anything, as well as the margin of error for Cornel West could be anywhere from 1%. He could have actually got 1% to 7% in the general public. I think it would be closer to the lower limit than the upper limit, simply because people don't know who he is so far. So margin of error makes this, you shouldn't make much of anything out of this just on the basis that they switch positions. Who is in the lead? Trump in the lead by 1 percentage point, and then Biden in the lead by 1 percentage point. I keep saying that, guess in the back of my mind, it's a worry. Or, vice versa in the lead by 1 percentage point. So 1 percentage point is nothing. That's the first thing I want to say. The other thing is that there's nothing about Cornel West in particular that would make him more attractive to Joe Biden voters based on how they asked control questions. In control questions, they again had Trump and Biden as the choices, but instead of West, they introduced some other random celebrity or personality, and the results are almost identical. So number one, they added Taylor Swift, well-known recorder, recording artist and composer. In that case, Trump went down to 43%, identical to when you add West to the mix, and Biden went down to 41%, which is almost virtually identical to what he got, and Taylor Swift got 7%. She did it better than West. She's much better known than West. And what can we say from that? It's simply that you add anybody to the mix, and it's going to take away some votes from either of the major party candidates. They also added Andy Cohen as a second survey question. Here again, Trump gets 44%, Biden 42%, virtually identical, and Cohen gets 4%, which is virtually identical to Cornel West. Now, I don't know if you know who Andy Cohen is. I had no idea until I looked him up today. He is the host of the Real Housewives TV franchise. If you're a fan of the show, you may have heard of him. And if you're a fan of left-wing politics, you may have heard of Cornel West. But if you're not, these are just random names that appear. So in any of these cases, the vote for a third candidate is around the same, and the votes for Biden and Trump are about the same. There's really no big change, no matter who you introduce or whether you're matching up Trump and Biden head-to-head without any third candidate. Just the margin's too close to call. Doesn't make any difference one way or the other. Okay, let's look even further at this. And by the way, they did do a July survey as well. So the one I've been talking about was based on a late June survey. They have one for July, but in July, they didn't add Cornel West to it. There were no questions about Cornel West, presumably because West was in the news a lot in June. First, when he announced his run for the presidency, and second, when he decided to seek the nomination of the Green Party. In each case, there was a outburst of news interest in him, and that's why they decided to add it. But if you look at the July survey, the percentages for Trump and Biden are exactly the same. Trump gets 44%, Biden gets 45% in the head-to-head matchup. So that there's no change in that from month to month. So going back to the question of Cornel West, if we look at favorability, we can learn some things from that, and some pertinent to our question, some just of general interest. They added not only various candidates for the presidency in 2024 that have announced so far, but they've also added a couple of celebrities and the Republican and Democratic parties to see how favorable they are. And if you're watching on the video, you can see in the boldface columns the name of the particular person or institution that they're surveying about, and then the combined all the favorable, very favorable and somewhat favorable scores in the first column, and the very unfavorable and somewhat unfavorable scores in the second column. So that's what I'm going to be looking at initially. What you find, they've ranked these according to the people or institutions that had the highest favorable versus unfavorable ratings. And the top two were celebrities, Matthew McConaughey and Taylor Swift. And of course, they're well-known, don't have much reason to dislike them. So their favorable ratings were very high. When you get down to third place, though, and this is Interesting that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is in third place in having high favorable to unfavorable ratings. He has 46% very or somewhat favorable to 24% very or somewhat unfavorable. Interesting that he's at the top of the list of all the candidates, because you would think that with all the barrage of negative stories about him being an anti-vaxxer and all these other accusations and controversy over his position over Israel and other things that the news have been bringing up, almost all negative, by the way, he would have a lower favorability rating or a higher unfavorability rating, but he's got 46 to 24. Now, they did ask about RFK Jr. in the July poll, and it's hardly changed at all, but it is somewhat lower on the favorability, somewhat higher on the unfavorability. And I would say that's because of these news stories, either because people are learning about things that make him less favorable, more unfavorable, or simply because the news is relentlessly being negative on him, that people pick up on the vibe. Anyway, he got 40 favorable, 31 unfavorable, which is like in June, there was a 22 percentage point difference between favorable and unfavorable. And in July, there was a 9% difference. So there's a big change in the gap between favorable and unfavorability for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., although he's still more favorable than unfavorable and still near the top of the list for politicians, or I think he is at the top of the list for politicians. So in the June survey, if you go down to Republican candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, he has the highest among the politicians. He's got 31% favorable, or very favorable, meaning either very or somewhat favorable, and 14% unfavorable. But more importantly, if you look way down at the end of the column, if you can see this, he has 38% saying they never heard of him. No, excuse me, yeah, 38% saying they never heard of him. Now with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., only 3% say they never heard of him, and 27% say they've heard of him, but they have no opinion about him for or against. So that's almost a third of the population don't have an opinion on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But with Vivek Ramaswamy, it's much higher. You got 38% never heard of him. I'm not sure I wrote down how many had no opinion on him, but the point is that not many people know who these candidates are. Position number 6 is the next politician, Tim Scott, running for the Republican primary. He has 26% favorable, 21% unfavorable. That's getting very close to neutral, and 34% don't know who he is. You go down the list, and the last position that has more favorable than unfavorable is Cornel West. He's at position number 7. And his favorability rating is 14%, and his unfavorable rating is 10%, which means only 24% of the population in this survey had a favorable or unfavorable position on him, which means he's not very well known, obviously. So look down at the end of the column, and you find that 53% of the people have never heard of Cornel West. That's more than half. And 23% have heard the name, but have no opinion of him. So that's 3/4 of the population who either don't know who he is or don't have much of an opinion of him one way or the other, which means when you're basing a survey question on how many people would vote for someone, and most people have no idea who he is, you can't extrapolate very far from that. Presuming over the course of this election, he's going to become a lot better known, all that could change between who's favorable and who's unfavorable. So it's on very shaky grounds, but he is more favorable than unfavorable. And as you go down below West, you find the unfavorable ratings are now higher than the favorable ratings for each of the other candidates, including Democratic Party and Republican Party, more unfavorable than favorable. Ron DeSantis, Kamala Harris, and you get down to Joe Biden near the end of the list. He's got 42% favorable and 55% unfavorable, so a higher unfavorable rating than favorable, and less than 1% have never heard of him. Being president of the United States, you'd hope that was the case. Donald Trump, his favorable rating was 39%, so lower than Joe Biden, and his unfavorable was 57%, so a lot more unfavorability than favorability, and 1% had never heard of Donald Trump, those lucky people. And at the very bottom of the list is poor old Mike Pence, who is even lower on the list. In July, they were not much different. Biden was 41% favorable, 55 unfavorable. Trump was 41 favorable, 57% unfavorable. So in both cases, more people dislike than like those particular candidates. West, in this survey where very few people know who he is yet, at this stage at least, is more favorable than unfavorable, as is RFK, who a lot more people have heard of. Okay, so from that, you can tell that this, there's a lot of unfavorability for the major party candidates, which we already knew, and you stick anybody into the list that might be more favorable, that might get a better reaction than those people. Although, once you're a known politician, once you're associated with a party too closely, it seems like your favorability goes down. So let's look at another thing. They also polled, and this is an aside from Cornel West, but it says something again about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They polled likely Republican and Democratic voters about their choices in the presidential primaries, who they would vote for if it was held today. And on the Republican side, you can see that 49% of the Republican voters would vote for Donald Trump, 16% for Ron DeSantis, 10% for Vivek Ramaswamy, and it goes down from there. There's a heck of a lot of candidates who are splitting the vote between them, presumably the anti-Trump vote. So Trump is around half. The people said they'd vote for him if it were held today. And DeSantis, who gets a lot of news coverage, both pro and con, as though he's a real big contender with Donald Trump, down at 16%. Let's turn now and look at the Democratic side of it. And what we find is that Joe Biden, 65% of the Democratic voters say they would vote for him if the primary was held today. And in July, the next month, it's similar. It's 62%. And for RFK, it's 14%, which is comparable to what Ron DeSantis is getting. And in July, that goes up to 16% as well. So virtually identical to what DeSantis got in June. So both Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Ron DeSantis are about the same place in the primaries, although, you would never know it from some of the news coverage. Although I have to admit that Biden seems to be more popular in the Democratic Party than Trump is among the Republicans, according to the survey done in June. All right, so let me step outside of that poll for a minute. And what I didn't have access to was the survey results for particular states in the United States. Now, this is important because we know that a lot of states are almost guaranteed to lean towards the Democrat or Republican candidate, no matter who they are. And the election is not based on the popular vote. No matter how close it is, it's based on the electoral vote. So the electoral votes you get in particular states are what counts. And if you can pretty much be sure you're going to be ahead in a large number of those states, which they are, you know that those candidates for the Republican or Democratic Party are going to get a certain number of electoral votes. So what it boils down to is a small set of what are called swing states, where the difference between the two parties in recent elections is so close that a slight shift from one to the other could determine where those electoral votes for that state goes. So the Newsweek did find the results if you look at just swing states as opposed to looking at the whole United States. And what they found was that, okay, again, going back to all voters in the swing states, excuse me, all voters, Trump was 44%, Biden was 45%. If you look at just the swing states, Trump is at 48% and Biden at 41%. So what that says is that Trump has a bit of an edge in these swing states if you take those swing states as a whole, as a group. And by swing states, I'm talking about Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia. These all seem to be in contention, maybe Nevada as well. I'm not sure which states Newsweek included in their assessment of this, but it would be among those that set of about a half dozen states. Now, the thing you have to remember, though, is that that's aggregating all those states together. if only one or two states goes outside of that close margin, that could make the difference in the electoral college, because you can just get a slightly more than the other candidate. You get all the electoral votes in that state, which means that as a whole, if you average out all the swing states and you say, well, still this candidate is ahead of that candidate, it may be very different in particular states where one candidate gets a definite lead over the other. And that's information I didn't have. But it found that if you look at the swing states, I'm not sure if I said this, but Trump gets 48% of the vote, and Biden 41%. Yeah, I did say that because it shows Trump slightly ahead. But if you add West, Cornel West to the mix, you get Trump at 48%, Biden at 40%, and West at 3%. Virtually no difference between the percentage saying they would likely or definitely vote for the major party candidate. Trump, 48% in both cases, whether you include West or not. Biden, 41% without West, 40% with West, well within the margin of error. West down at 3%, so he doesn't really have much effect in the swing states. If you're in one of the non-swing states, this worry about Cornel West being a spoiler shouldn't even be crossing your mind, because no matter whether you vote for him or not, it's likely to have little effect on the outcome of the awarding of electoral votes from your state. In that small set of swing states, it may make a difference, but it's the margin is so narrow, it's hard to say what it's going to be going forward. And in any event, you'd have to, how do I want to put this? Let's look back at some of the elections that are often brought up as cases in which a candidate from the Green Party played the role of a spoiler. So first, let's look at Michigan. In 2016, the race was between Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and several other candidates, including Jill Stein of the Green Party. She was accused of being a spoiler in several states, not seven, just a handful of states. Michigan, she got the highest number of votes compared to the margin of vote difference between Biden, Clinton, and Trump. Excuse me, I get them confused a lot. In that case, the margin of difference between Trump and Clinton was 10,704 votes. That was in favor of Trump, and Stein got 51,463 votes. Now that sounds like if she really took votes away from Joe Biden, that could have made a big difference. But here's the thing. There's about nearly 5 million people who voted in Michigan in that election. That means that Jill Stein's percentage of the overall vote was about 1.1% of the vote. Now, the number of votes may look high, but when you render it as a percentage, you could say any one of a number of factors could have swayed people 1% this way or that way. You have a late-breaking scandal. You have a stupid statement from a candidate, a major party candidate. You have, some gaffe or something. Any one of a number of things could sway voters 1 percentage point or so, one way or the other. So I would say that there's a host of factors that would outweigh any effect a Green Party candidate at that percentage would get. Now, in 2000 is the other case where people accused Ralph Nader of spoiling the election because he got an even higher number of votes relative to the margin of difference between the major party candidates. Okay, in 2000, the major party candidates were George W. Bush and Al Gore Jr., the Republican and Democrat, respectively, for those of you who don't read history books and weren't around then. And Ralph Nader was the candidate of the Green Party, its first real strong presidential election. And you found that the Florida vote, there was only a 537 vote difference, and a lot of people have raked over these numbers a lot, but it's around that in favor of Bush, over Gore. And Nader, in comparison, got 97,488 votes. And if you assume, which is not a totally reliable assumption, that Nader took those votes from Al Gore, you could say, well, this could have had a big effect on the election. But again, the percentage that Nader got of the vote was relatively small. And so we're talking about, what did he get? He got like 1.5%, something along that line. It is a very small percentage of the vote. And again, there were so many factors at play. People, people disliking what Bill Clinton may have said when he inserted himself into the campaign, that Al Gore was not, taking a position on an issue that they cared about, or he switched positions, or George W. Bush had one of his many Bushisms, saying things that are somewhat incomprehensible. Any one of those things could have a bigger effect than Ralph Nader did. So to blame it on Nader is a fallacy in my mind. You just can't say that that single factor swayed enough people to make a difference outside of everything else. Everything being equal, sure, Ralph Nader's percentage probably pulled more from Gore than Bush, but everything's not equal. And with that low a percentage of the vote, which is in question, a lot of those things that could be not equal are taking place all the time. So the context matters tremendously compared to a candidate who's getting a low percentage like that. I won't even go into the ramifications of asserting that somebody should not run for office because they might get some votes. That's the whole name of the game. Or that a candidate can blame another candidate for taking away votes. It's the responsibility of the candidate complaining to do things that get him votes. And if the number of votes he needs is only a small percentage of the total number of voters, no sense of blaming somebody else where you could have run a stronger campaign or done things differently or not made certain mistakes. So I did get into it, I guess. I got into that, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Or you're putting way too much weight on these third-party candidates and their role in the race compared to other factors. Even if you go higher than Nader did, it's still going to be fairly trivial in the larger scheme of things. So I guess that's most of what I want to say today. Anything else that I forgot to say about this? Yeah, just that I think if people are saying this is all about ego, why is West even running and taking the risk that he might sway voters away from Biden and cause Trump to win? Why is he doing this? It must be ego or stupidity or something, or just recklessness. There's a lot of reasons to run candidates for elections other than ego or winning or, being reckless. You could be trying to build an organization. You could be trying to raise issues. You could be trying to, plan for the future that we can actually get more candidates saying what's wrong with both of the major parties and eventually build up their votes, the percentage of the vote to get in places. And as you have things like ranked choice voting spreading around the country, you're going to find that there is an opportunity to some extent, at least, get rid of the spoiler problem so that candidates can run in those states. I'm not sure if the presidential races in Alaska and, I think in Maine, it does include that. Anyway, we're changing voting methods. We're in the process of that. Over the next few years, we'll probably see more of that. Whatever I was going to say, I don't recall at all, other than to say it's good for candidates to run for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with trying to win or trying to move a party in a certain direction or just ego. And that's what I got to say about that. So repeating myself at this point, tired, long day, very busy in the Star Voting campaign and being involved in my State Green Party, trying to reorganize it so that it's better functional. Big debate going on about that here. So I'm signing off right now. I hope you got something out of this. Next week, I'll be back with, I hope, interviewing a delegate from the Democratic Socialists of America National Convention and find out what went on there, at least in her eyes, what was important, what to look at, what to think about. Okay. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you another time. Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We've gained our focus. The moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.